I was reflecting the other day on how we make notes, and I couldn't help but notice if I think back, way back to when I was a youngster at school, I don't ever recall being taught how to make effective notes. Do you share the same memory? Do you ever remember a teacher explaining to you in detail, this is how you make notes? I feel like intuitively we sort of figure this out. We bump our heads in the wall a little bit, but we get there, right? We learn that titles are important. You must find keywords. You got to underline the key information. But what if there was a method, like a secret method that could help us to get through this with a little bit more organization? Well, you're in luck. I've got the process, and I'm going to introduce it to you right now to help you get up to speed. If you haven't seen it before, this is an excellent blueprint for how to make effective notes. That's going to help you in any situation you find yourself in, whether you're at school or the corporate world. Doesn't really matter where you are. Now, who am I? I'm Dr. Rikus Botha. And what are we going to cover? Well, this is the SQ3R method of note taking. Now, this method was originally developed by Francis P. Robinson in 1946. It's not even a new method, yet it's not being taught widely. That's kind of strange. So, have you had this situation? Maybe you're sitting there in the library, you're trying to pick up some new information, and you just start laughing hysterically, like, why doesn't this make sense? Why can't I remember this information? Strange how that works. Now, there's a very simple reason for it. It's the process. You didn't have the right method. Now, I'm going to say you need to forget what you've learned before. No, wait, that could be important. Don't forget everything. But you do need to more or less forget the previous methods you've used for note taking, at least for now. Keep an open mind, and let's see if we can quickly go through this method and get you up to speed on how to make your notes more effectively. Now, here it is, SQ3R. Very, very straightforward. The name itself is an acronym that combines all of the processes that we need to follow into something that is simple to remember. So don't forget the acronym. Very, very easy, SQ3R. So what does it stand for? Well, we have survey, question, read, recite, and review. Fairly logical once you see them, so it should be easy to remember. At least I hope it'll be easy to remember. So let's work through each one. We'll add a little bit of detail. So survey, what do we do when we survey information? Well, as soon as you see information, your first objective should be to scan through and find key headings, indexes, pictures, anything else that helps you. But before we do this, there's really something else that's missing in this process that we need to talk about, and that's memory. Hopefully you're familiar with the 3 stages of memory. That's encoding, storage, and recall. We must incorporate that into our note-taking methods if we want them to be effective. If we don't consider it or reflect on it, you're not going to remember half of what you write down. It's kind of a weird mystery. Very complicated. Lots of other things impact it as well. One of the main ones is interest. If you have no interest in the material whatsoever, you're not going to remember it. And it makes sense. Your brain cells are in tune to grab onto information. But if you yourself do not believe that you need the information, I mean, why are you reading it? Your brain knows. You can't trick it. Trust me on this. So very, very important. We must first scan a resource to find those key bits of information. Now, this one I think is something we do learn intuitively, and we do get some instruction on this as well. So finding those headings, straightforward. But there's another element here that I think is somewhat mysterious, and that every single person is going to be unique in what they find from a given resource. I guarantee you can test this out. Take 2 individuals, pass them the same resource, ask them to find the keywords, and I'll be surprised if both of them manage to pull out the same keywords. They will have similarities, absolutely. No 2 people will come up with the exact same keywords, which is fascinating in its own right, but who's right and who's wrong? That in itself creates all sorts of questions and complexities within our learning. Now, with our ability to scan a resource effectively, practice makes perfect as well. We gain this over experience. The next thing we need to do is question. What is the question that we're questioning? Good question. The most important thing we need to figure out is, what are we seeking to achieve by reading this material? Now, more often than not, we have a goal for the material. We need to set that goal. We need to be mindful of that goal and reflect on it. Why are we reading this information? Jot down a few keywords yourself for your purpose for reading the information. If you don't have a purpose, you're not going to get the most out of it. So it's actually really important. Read with purpose. Purpose for reading. Really, really important. Now, with this mindset and with our question in mind, we can now really begin to formulate our own question. Because if we understand the information, we understand the reason we're working through the information, we can begin to formulate our own reason and our own objective for reading the information. And that would be broadly defined as active reading, partaking in the reading with purpose. Very, very important. Now, the next one is, surprisingly enough, reading. Take note, those 2 steps should occur theoretically before before you actually read the information. Sounds surprising. That's a lot of work before you read, but yes, if you don't do those steps, you will find you're going to have to reread the information, which just isn't efficient. No one has time for that. So keep this in mind next time. First, survey the information. Find those keywords, track down the information you need, set yourself a goal. Why am I running through this information? What is my end point that I need to achieve? Then you begin to question, well, what are the things that I seek to achieve by going through this information? Is there a specific answer I'm after? Is there knowledge or experience that I need to gain? And then you launch into your purposeful reading. Now, what do we need to do for purposeful reading? Again, that's something we learn intuitively. It's deep reading. We want to really go through the material, try and absorb as much as we can, reflect on it. Now, there's a process of time here. If we speed read that information, and some of you might be really good at this, you're definitely not going to pick up the same amount of information as if you sort of meditate on the book. And I've had this with books that I've read myself. When you work through a resource, you can speed read it, absolutely, and you gain a decent, shall we say, benefit from it. But if you take your time and really read it, and if you run to something interesting and you do a quick maybe online search on it, you find so much more within that book. And I think that's why a lot of people, and even famous YouTubers, manage to reread the same book and come up with new information from that book. Speed reading, it's a problem, but also really beneficial. So if you have a skill, don't throw that away, you need it. But definitely consider this. Try and do a bit more deep reading and be very reflective. Could be worth making some notes. If you aren't doing this already, grab some notepad, jot down some keywords, some key ideas as you're reading that book. Yes, it's going to slow down your reading, but so much more impactful when you are actively, deeply reading the information. That's also going to boost your memory, because then it tells your brain that, hey, by the way, this is really important. Spending a lot of time on it, reflecting on it, really absorbing the information. Your neurons will be stimulated. You're going to break that threshold, and your memory is going to be stronger than they would be if you had not done so. Now, another key thing will be a summary. Again, most people do this automatically, but pointing out the obvious. If you read through the information and you're not making a summary of what you had just read, you're going to forget all of it. It's kind of a cruel thing, or I say all of it, you're probably going to forget about 80% of it. You'll remember 20%. That's scientifically founded. The forgetting curve, you've probably heard of it. Ebbinghaus, great scientist, amazing, amazing work. But this is where we can wrap all this up with a very simple goal. What is our goal when we're doing purposeful reading? How do we tie this package together to help us to stay really focused? Simple, it's understanding. We set ourselves a question, now we're trying to find the solution to whatever that question is. Now, in terms of understanding, there's usually a bigger goal that feeds into this process. Maybe it's qualification, maybe it's a business meeting coming up, or a new idea, new venture. Now, in this process, your brain cells are going to be firing up, and this is where there's another component that you really need to bring in here to really get your cells fired up. And that's what I'm going to call, just broadly, linking. You want to create links to other information to really find the connections and interactions in those neurons, because they are wired incredibly. It's a complicated machine, the brain. It has so many connections, but part of the challenge is finding a way to integrate all of those connections. So we'll get onto that in a bit more detail soon. But the next key point there is recite. Now, it'd be fun to verbally recite, but it's kind of awkward if you're sitting in a library, and trust me, I've seen this happen. It's not good. People don't appreciate that one person who starts verbally reciting everything they're learning. No matter how great it is for your memory, it distracts everyone else, so don't do that. Unless it works really well, in which case I guess it's okay. Awkward. But very important. You want to do multimodal if you can. So try and employ a little bit of verbal. If you love digital notes, go for those digital notes. Things like Notion or Evernote or even OneNote, great applications to help you boost this process as well. And you can actually create little summary notes where you practice what you've just read and try and recite some of the information. But very important, written. Pen and paper, can't fault it, still one of the best ways to do it. But I will challenge you, while you're doing this, shall we say, recall process, thinking about the memory stages, you're trying to test, okay, what did I actually absorb out of the session? You want to create order within the information. If there's no structure to the information, you're just going to forget it all as well. A strange plot twist. Now, what is our end goal here for reciting information that we have just worked our way through and potentially made a little summary for? Well, obviously, it's memory. We're trying to remember the information because there is some future time point where it is actually going to be critical for our functioning. So we need to reflect on this a little bit and really think about it. How do we boost our memory for this? How do we actually help our memory to realize the importance of this? Maybe it's that business meeting, that promotion, or school grades. Doesn't really matter what the end point is. It's different for everyone, but it is there. Now, adding into the, shall we say, Ebbinghaus equation, the forgetting curve, how over time we forget information, if we don't retrieve it and recite it, well, it doesn't work any different here. The brain is a fine-tuned machine. It also doesn't like redundant data sets. So if you're in there, you've got all this information and the brain does not see you using it, well, it's just going to delete it all. Makes sense. If only our computers were that efficient, we'd never run out of storage space. I'm always out of storage space. Okay, last step, review. Very, very important. You want to review this multiple times over the course of time. And repetition. I mean, everyone knows repetition's important, but again, there's a little bit of strategy in there because you don't just want to recite it. The best way will be to do STM, that is study method, study technique, memory technique, a phrase that I coined. Very important to choose some of those methods at this point to boost your ability to really, really hammer out good quality memories. If I had to choose, I would do elaborative rehearsal, which is more or less what we've already done through doing deep reading. But the idea is we're trying to really boost our long-term memory by reflecting on the information and taking that extra time to do some deep thinking on the information. Elaborative rehearsal, the very important study technique to use when you're going through information. Now, another key consideration is the degree of integration that you're forming with information. You must form links to other information you already know in order to boost the strength of the memory you have just formed. That's quite an important detail. Now, one more little trick. I would also use a study method, which is the Leitner system. What is the Leitner system? Well, it's essentially flashcards raised to a whole new level. It's originally devised by a German scientist by the name of Sebastian Leitner way back in 1972. Now, the system is very simple. You take flashcards, which you probably already know how they work. You've got a little card with an answer on one end and a question prompt on another, so testing your recall. And on this particular system, you would start with information in one box. You'd set out maybe 5 tiers of boxes, and every question that you've set up, maybe you've got 50 flashcards, they all start in the first tier. You work your way through, you test yourself on each one, and then if you get the answer correct, you move it to the second tier. If you get it wrong, it stays in the first tier. And then the next day you come back and you do them again, and your goal is to get them correct consistently at least 5 times. Then you can take them out of the box because presumably by then you know that particular answer. But if you do get it wrong, it goes back. And by doing this, we sort of reinforce the number of repetitions that we do. It's a very simple process. That's going to boost your rehearsal and thus your retrieval of key information. And it's a very easy system that's free that you can employ at this particular step, which is great value. Now, as with previous methods, we do need to set a goal. And our goal for the review step is integration. We're trying to find the links of information that we already know to help strengthen the new information that we've just absorbed. Now that was SQ3R. It's a little bit of a tune-up. Hopefully enjoyed that process. But we're not done yet. Because right now we have the method, but it's not looking particularly colorful. It's not been organized very well, and wow, there's definitely room for improvement. So thinking about another little STM technique that could boost your functioning, you could turn this into a mind map. So I would add color, I would add numbers to try and organize it. Now for each one of those headings, we set a goal. I put a number next to each of the headings. Goal 1, read with purpose. Goal 2, active reading. Goal 3, understanding. Goal 4, memory retrieval, using some memory techniques perhaps. And goal 5, integration. Now it's very important to also then incorporate maybe some color. Color by itself, great resource. I would also include some pictures or diagrams to really boost this note of whatever it is I've just made. And if I run into any questions while I'm revising or enhancing this end note that I've just recorded, I do some research and expand on it. And only then do you truly gain mastery of whatever the resource is that you're working through. Now, another key consideration for repetition and review is that of retention, linking, and rereading. Creates a nice little summary of the key things we need to do, but I will stress here, scientifically, rereading is one of the least effective methods for remembering information. There are so many better techniques. So it's well worth your time reflecting on what is the best process. Subscribe, I'll teach you how to do it. There are so many effective techniques that can help you to recall information and store it more effectively. Now I can see the obvious question here is, but wait, that's such a long process. Sometimes I don't have time to do that. That's fair. In the modern world, things get busy and we have to find the optimal process to work through information. But full disclosure, I have another method that's even more complicated, but it does work so much better. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you on a future video. Good luck with your SQ3R note taking.